Yeah, I'll do a quick introduction. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. I am Joel Bramhall, the Director of Education at Myriad Gardens. We're doing this little off-site adventure here today in the cold. Excited you can make it. Very happy that we have Dale Spoonemore and Carrie Spoonemore to lead us through their backyard adventure that they've been on for the last, what now, 4 years?
4 years, yeah.
4 years. So without any further ado, thank you very much. If you need anything, let me know. Otherwise, thank you.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and get back in the garden, and then we'll kind of tell you our story and explain how we got to here and why and all of that. Started right here. This was our first raised bed. And I want to talk a little bit about like why we started and what led to all this and all of that. So we bought this house 4 years ago, almost on the day, almost.
Yeah.
So when we moved in, we came from a house actually in this neighborhood around over on that side that had no backyard. And when we were looking for houses, one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to start trying to grow food because Carrie's a nurse and she helped me realize that I could help manage anxiety and depression through this, basically. And when we started, that was the idea that led us to start the garden. So when we started, it was right here. This was our first bed, and then we had another one right next to it that looked just like it. And we basically just started with one of each thing that we knew of at the time.
Just
so
to experiment.
yeah, we had like tomatoes and peppers, like some oregano, like stuff that we knew what it was.
Lots of spinach.
Yeah, yeah. And spinach was the thing that really hooked us. If you've never had spinach out of the garden, please come try. Like, come pick one of these leaves and try it. This was the moment for me when I first tasted spinach out of the garden, because it tastes unlike any spinach I've ever had before. It has like unique flavors to it. It's cool and crisp, and I don't know, I realized I was missing something. And that's really where our journey started, was, just we wanted to try a couple of each things, and then it kind of spiraled from there. So the best way to do this, I think, is kind of walk through what we did as we built out. And I'm going to talk through why we did things the way we did and what we learned and what mistakes we made. So right off the bat, you notice this one here is raised up off the ground, okay? We did that because these beds do not get sun from October to right about now. They're starting to get sun. But the problem was we wanted to grow in those months, and these were completely shaded. So we thought, well, let's just build them up off the ground to get them up off in the air, and that's when we built these. The problem with these is they get way too cold in the summer and in the winter, and then way too hot in the summer. But they are great for the fringe seasons, for greens especially. So we grow mostly lettuce and spinach and kale in these. We'll start planting it here. Well, it was going to be this weekend until it was so cold. As soon as it warms back up, we're going to be planting seeds for all of that here, and then we'll have it here all the way until May or so. It'll start bolting on these. So let's walk over this way, and I'll kind of talk through some of our strategies of what we started with and what we've learned from. So whenever we started to expand out this way, originally Carrie was okay with me having gardens like here, and that was it. And then I just kind of kept going, and then it went from there. But the way that we expanded and the way that we started our gardens was we had grass kind of all around. And the first year, we did not have mulch around these beds at all. So we were fighting Bermuda constantly on this bed and the one that was next to us. And it was pretty miserable. So that next year, we covered the entire yard with cardboard. So all this area here, you see, was covered with a layer of cardboard. And then the wood chips we brought in from the Norman Compost Facility. So I'd go get a truckload of wood chips every week and then lay it out and just kept dumping layers and layers. So, and then we would go through and kind of scoot the wood chips apart and then build the raised beds, in their place. We actually have it now to where, let me grab a shovel and I can show you what this soil looks like underneath the wood chips now. So we're at the point now where we can plant directly in these wood chips. This was Bermuda grass before, and now when you get down, it's good stuff. So like what our strategy for that is, our raised beds are reserved for things like spinach, kale, the things that we like to grow a lot of and harvest frequently without having wood chips involved. That You know, so things like squash, I'm okay growing outside of the raised beds, you know, because they take a lot of space. They're not easy to grow in together. But we try and reserve these raised beds for those things that are easily grown together like that. If you have any questions along the way, please just yell them out.
Did you leave the cardboard down
Mm-hmm.
and put the chips on, and then it just decomposes?
Yeah, the cardboard will be gone in 6 months. The worms come up and eat it, and then it's
Did
gone.
you mow the grass first?
No, we just put the cardboard directly on top. And you'll see that on this side, I did not do a good enough job of the cardboard here. And I learned my lesson because I'm still fighting it in this area. Over here, I did a really good job, and there's no Bermuda issues there. So I would do 2 layers of cardboard and 2 feet of wood chips. And you will not have any Bermuda issues at all. Another way to get wood chips, aside from having to go to like the compost place, which again, they're free there, but chipdrop.com is a service where landscaping companies will sign up for it, and whenever they have a big load of wood chips that need to be dropped somewhere, they'll search for the nearest house and they'll come drop them. So literally they dropped them on our driveway, and it was like a van-sized pile of wood chips.
It was just a huge mountain.
It took me like a week.
Like an entire week of
We've got a time-lapse
just...
video of us doing it, and the kids are helping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did the kids play on them?
Oh yeah, they love it.
Climbing the mountain up to the top.
Yeah. So that's where we get wood chips for all this. If I had to do it over again, I would probably just use smart pots from the beginning. And I'll talk more about those here in a little bit, but I think they're a lot easier. First of all, they're going to last longer. I mean, this wood is already starting to come apart, and it's only 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years on this one. This is the second year. These smart pots, our oldest one is 2 at this point, but we've been told they last up to 10 years, and I've seen some that are really old. So if you're not familiar with these, they're made out of like a fabric, almost like a felt type material. And the nice thing about them is that plants are able to breathe through the side. In addition, normally plants can only breathe through the top, basically. They're pulling oxygen from there. Well, plants are able to pull in oxygen from the sides because when roots hit the side, instead of starting to circle like they do in regular containers, they stop and they form these little, like tiny little capillaries, and they suck in oxygen from the side. So I was super skeptical. That's why you see this one over here is buried in the ground. And I did that one next to this one at the same time as a comparison to see what would happen. And this one did better. So, and one way I've really started to use these, I'll show you when we get on that side, is using smaller smart pots instead of these larger ones for a number of reasons. I think the main one is watering in the summer, because the smaller smart pots, we can take them and put inside of a kiddie pool and then fill that kiddie pool with like an inch or 2 of water, and then it sub-irrigates. And I'll show you how we do all that once we get over on that side. But so once we got to this point, it was becoming hard to manage the watering. I work from home primarily, but it was still hard sometimes to keep up with all the watering. This is just PVC pipe that we drilled holes in every 3 inches. There's holes drilled. And I just got the smallest drill bit I could find. It's like 1/64. And then just connected that up to the PVC here. And then to connect here, we have, it's one of the fittings around here. I'll find one for the end. So there's a fitting that it's at Home Depot for like $2 that lets you connect just a regular garden hose up to it. And then when you hook it up, water comes out. And you can only do 1 bed at a time. So we have an Orbit timer. It has 4 outlets on it. And then each one of those has its own schedule that it runs on. That worked well in the beginning when we had like this amount of beds. As we scaled out, it became a problem because I can only water 1 at a time. That's a lot of timers I've got going and stuff. So really the ideal solution for watering is the irrigation tubing with the emitters. So it's like that black tubing, and then you poke in the emitters. Those are the ideal solution. It would be pretty expensive for us to do it here. And honestly, for us, like last year, our watering was done strictly from sprinklers. The problem with watering from a sprinkler is if you do it incorrectly. So if you do it too often, if you do it the wrong time of the day, it can lead to problems. But if you treat your sprinkler like you're just mimicking rain every 3 days in the morning, that's the way I would do it. So I actually have them like these right here. These are what I'd use. And I just had these set up. And it made it a lot easier last year for us. I still had to, I still use these when I'm doing sprouting and stuff like that. But I use them only for that. When it's just keeping things watered routinely, these work fine. Now it probably does use more water, obviously, but I don't see all of this as wasted space. It's space I'm going to be planting in. It's space we're going to be using, so I don't mind watering that.
Do you use your overhead sprinklers to cool the plants down when it gets really hot in the summer or anything like that?
Sometimes, I've tried that, but really, so the temperature sensor on a plant basically is at the base, right where it connects. So if you can cool the area down there, that's what you need to do. So what I'll do is if I have a crop of lettuce that's trying to bolt on me and I'm trying to keep it alive, I'll set the timer to run cold water on it like every hour through the heat of the day. And then I'll do that in addition to like a shade cloth on top of it, and then some mulch maybe. And that's the way I'll do like that temperature control on that. Or I'll have it in a smart pot and move it into shade. So let's talk about, I don't know, Carrie, I'm doing a lot of talking. Is there anything you want to say?
Well, I was going to say, when you're talking about the shade, we could talk about the living shade walls. Too.
Yes, yeah. So there you go. Good idea. So these things here. So these started as trellises, obviously, but then we realized that we could use them as more than just for trellising plants. So the idea is that full sun in Oklahoma is not good for most plants in the middle of the summer. Okra and basil will like it, but outside of that, you're going to have even tomatoes, like they like some shade in the afternoon. So obviously we have a bunch of gardens here and we wanted a way to be able to provide shade. So we built these. And initially we put shade cloth on the side, so in the afternoon, when the sun's over there, everything will be shaded. But what we started doing instead is just growing things up it. So it's like a living shade wall. So in the spring, it's peas. We don't really need shade in the spring. So peas only grow to like here, but that's fine. We're not really using them for shade in the spring. What we really start, right when the peas are done, we'll come right behind it with like,
Beans. Southern peas.
Yeah, we'll do like southern peas or beans, but we try to switch it up where we don't do the same family year after it. So it'll be like a winter squash or something to go after a pea. But the point is something that gets very vining and vigorous to cover that wall. You also did like a lot of flowers last year, like cardinal flower, stuff like that. She's always sneaking flowers everywhere.
Have to add color.
These cattle panel trellises are awesome too. It's a cattle panel that's a Tractor Supply. I think it's like $15 for this, something like that.
We grew loofah up at last time. It was great. The loofahs were hanging down right here.
Yeah, we had 2 orb weavers had their web set up here and everything. So this stuff was all planted last year in November, and it overwintered without me. I didn't cover it or do anything. This is spinach and kale for the most part. I think that's broccoli, might be a collard green there. I can't really tell them apart till they get a little bigger. But it didn't really produce a lot over the winter, so we haven't been able to really eat on it. But it's really going to explode with growth. It did a few weeks ago, it did, and then it went dormant again when it got cold. So hopefully the next few weeks, this is going to really explode with growth. Now the thing about this stuff is it's going to be quicker to bolt in the summer. So the spinach the kale's a biennial, but the spinach will be quicker to bolt, and the lettuce that overwintered will be quicker to bolt because it went through a winter. So it's not as, it doesn't mind dying as much as the ones that haven't gone through a winter yet, So the way that we use that idea is that we have this planted. This gives us our early crop of greens going into the, here soon. And then we'll come behind and plant the other spinach, lettuce, and kale starting now. And then that will last longer into the summer and it won't bolt as easily. So then we have stuff that lasts a little bit later. But that's mostly going to be planted over on the side of the shed where we have a lot of shade in the afternoon, and I'll show more of that here in a second when we get over there.
Seed, or do you any of them from plugs, like you're starting this thing inside or anything like that?
We start some stuff inside. We've got some stuff inside right now that I'll show. That we've got some broccoli, some kale, and some cabbage that we started indoors. For the most part, we do everything from seed outdoors. We also have some peppers and tomatoes we're starting inside, but for like broccoli and cabbage and things like that, I will start some indoors, but I also think about broccoli and cabbage differently. I don't grow it just to get like a big head of broccoli anymore. I grow the sprouting broccolis and things like that, and I'll plant it really dense, and then I'll thin down and eat the thinnings as microgreens. So I'm getting more bang for my buck out of that space. Because the first year that we started and I was doing the square foot gardening method and I blocked off 18 inches for a cabbage, and I was just watching it and I saw this empty space around it and I just hated that idea of like I'm wasting space. And then it was just, you know, one day I realized, well, why am I doing that? I'm just going to, you know, spread them all everywhere. And then you let natural selection dictate which plant you're going to stick with. So whichever one looks the most vigorous after, you know, a month is the one that's ultimately the winner, and everything else has been eaten. And then we're able to add in more little greens here and there to our diet. And we're not growing those really big varieties of broccoli that grow the big heads. We're growing just the ones that do it. And then it's the same with cabbage. We're growing mostly the Asian cabbages, you know, the Napa cabbage, things like that. We're not really growing the cabbages that grow the big heads, because then you're fighting bugs off of them the whole time, and it's just kind of a pain. So you get it's a lot more bang for your buck out of the other ones, and they're easy to grow. I think I had to adjust my mindset on a lot of this stuff, because growing up you think of foods a certain way, but those foods are produced that way because they're easy to produce in mass production, and they don't necessarily always do well on the scale of what we're trying to do here. So once you start growing, you identify ways that you just adjust your thinking on stuff. And what taught us the broccoli thing was our first hailstorm out here when we had broccoli, and our broccoli got torn up and there's always broken leaves. And then someone told me, well, you can stir fry those leaves. And then we tried that and it was amazing. And it tastes like the inside of an egg roll when you stir fry broccoli and cabbage leaves. So then it was like, this is better than broccoli. Like, you know, like, so then like our strategy changed. And then that's why we have a lot of like greens like this, you know, and all of these different varieties have their own unique health benefits and qualities about them. So we try and have a mix of a lot of them and just throw them all in together. Okay, so over here we have, this is an herb area that we have set up. And if y'all want to try some of this stuff, feel free to. We've got rosemary here that you're more than welcome to pick from and try. It's not super fragrant this time of year. One thing I want to talk about on herbs and things like that. So we grow a lot of herbs, obviously, for a number of reasons. The first one is for the health benefits. So when we started growing food and Carrie started researching all the things that we could grow to help with anxiety and depression, quickly we figured out that rosemary and oregano and sage and some of these things were the first things we should start with. And it's not just anxiety and depression, it's pretty much everything these count as a health benefit for. So that was the first reason why we started. But then the second reason quickly followed was that we were getting tired of eating zucchini that tastes the exact same every day out of the garden, because we were getting a lot of zucchini. And one way that we could make it taste radically different was just by taking a handful of basil and throwing it in, or then taking the next day a handful of oregano, and it made it taste completely different. So those were the two main reasons why we started with herbs. And then, you know, we fell in love with the taste of them. And then, you know, and not just that, they all have different qualities. You know, like the sage bush that's over there, it's dormant right now, but in the middle of summer, like it's so fragrant, and it has a lot of stress relieving qualities. So I'll literally go bear hug it when I'm stressed out. My kids are screaming and I'm trying to code and I can't figure something out. I come out here and I bear hug my sage, and it works. I come inside smelling like sage, and or the rosemary, like it really does. It really does work that way. And the flowers that sage produces in June are incredible. I mean, it's one of the
bees too.
Yeah, it attracts a lot of bees in too, so a lot of beneficial insects. And that's one thing I guess I should talk about, is how we deal with pests and things like that. So we don't use any pesticide. We don't use any chemicals in our garden at all. Now, it's not necessarily because I'm not like a super organic hippie person. Like it's not really that. It's more of, it makes more sense to me not to, because if I start putting down pesticide, I'm going to kill the good bugs too. And now I'm in control of keeping track of all of the bugs, whereas nature will keep track of it for me if I just have the right environment set up. So our strategy has been, how do we replicate what the good bugs need so that they'll just live here all the time? So some of that involves, when we have an aphid infestation, it means not spraying them all off, just waiting a little bit for the ladybugs to show up, you know, and you have to be a little more patient. And with that comes the idea of just growing way more than you need. So when we only had 2 gardens and we had pests, it was a huge deal. Like, I was so mad at those bugs. But when we have all of this and I've got so much extra anyway, like, okay, you know, I just know that nature's going to balance it out and that the good bugs are going to win overall. So We will use some diatomaceous earth sparingly. I try not to use it too much because it'll kill the good bugs as well. I'll be honest, squash bugs are a nightmare, and we don't have a great solution for them other than we took last year off from squash for the most part. This year when we grow it, we're only going to grow it vertically. So we're going to grow it next to a T-post, and then as it grows, attach it up so that we can see the leaves at all times.
We're talking about doing a trap plant too in the beginning
Yes.
of the season.
Yeah, we're going to do like a trap crop. So we'll do probably Blue Hubbard is a great trap. Blue Hubbard squash is a great trap crop for squash, and we'll plant it probably back there in the corner. We had a lot of squash bugs when we had them last, and then we'll let that grow until mid-April, probably maybe the end of April, and all the squash bugs will be attracted to it. And I'll take that and I'll go throw it in a fire over there, and I'll laugh at them all, and it's gonna be awesome. And then we'll come, and then that area where they were, we'll like put diatomaceous earth all through there. Now the diatomaceous earth does not work on the adult squash bugs, but it does work on the nymphs and the babies. So, and then we'll wait a couple weeks to plant the real squash, and hopefully that made a big dent on the overwintering population. So who knows if it'll work. I think the key for us is going to be growing squash in a lot of different places around the yard, and then growing it all vertical, and just knowing that we're going to lose some of it, and by June we're probably done with it, but it's like a quarter each at the farmer's market, so not a big deal. The seeding square thing, I want to mention it. This thing is pretty awesome, especially when we're first starting out. If you're doing the square foot gardening method, which is basically you divide every square, every part of your garden into a square, and then each plant has its own measurements for how many per square, and then our app will actually give you the number per square for each one. We don't really use these as much for us, but these are awesome for the kids. It really helps them visualize. We taught our Mary, our 3-year-old, how to count and her colors through this thing too. So that's what this thing is. Let's talk through some of the other stuff we have going. So we've got chives that are starting to pop up. Chives, and this is garlic and chives. I think that's garlic. It's a mix of garlic and chives. You see all this stuff sprouting around. Garlic and chives are both perennial, so they'll come back year after year. They're pretty awesome. They're also a great companion plant. So we have them, you see kind of around the border of our beds generally. That helps repel pests, because pests find what they're looking for through their sense of smell. So as they're kind of hovering around or doing whatever they're doing, they're looking for their plant they're trying to attack through their sense of smell. So if you have a bunch of strongly scented stuff around the border or around the plants that you're trying to protect, then it makes it harder for the pests to find them. So things like chives, again, things like oregano, rosemary, sage, they're all super strong scented, and they help with pest prevention. So we have them kind of mixed all throughout the beds. Most of them are dormant now. I think over here I've got some oregano. It looks like it's dead, but it's not. You see a little green on there, and it'll explode back with growth here as it gets a little bit warmer. We've got some strawberries here in these smart pots. These strawberries actually are starting to take over this one on their own too. So I'm gonna let them have it. I'm just gonna let the strawberries go as far as they want. I'm just glad we finally have some success with strawberries, because the first couple of years they burned up, or just things didn't work out. Yeah, I think they like having this little bit of shade in the summer, because we've got this covered with beans, in the middle of the summer, so they get a break from the heat, and they like being there. Another kale this was transplanted the end of last year, so around Halloween time, November, is when we transplanted most of this. We lost most of it. I transplanted a little too late, and I probably should have covered it. Kale will make it through the winter just fine if it's established. It comes from Russia, so it laughs at our winters. But if you plant it like right before it gets cold and it doesn't get time to get established, then you'll lose it. So that's what happened here. You see, like, some of them survived, but I haven't talked anything about soil yet. So let's talk about how we fill these raised beds and all of that. So we started with the square foot gardening mix, which is 1/3 peat moss. Got it around here somewhere. 1/3 vermiculite and 1/3 compost. We've adjusted on that as we've gone. So I've backed off of vermiculite a little bit because it's expensive, and it's just really not needed as much, especially in the smart pots. So now what we'll do on a new bed generally is about 50% compost, and then 30% peat moss, 20% vermiculite around there. So that is a lot of compost to start with. And the way that I handle that is I will start by growing something that's a heavy feeder first. So it'll take up a lot of that excess nitrogen so that I wouldn't start with peas in a fresh bed because they're going to get burned up from that compost. So that's generally the way that we'll do a bed. And then from then on, it's just adding compost in every season. So I've got compost bins over there that we'll talk about here once we get over there. I also buy compost. Minnick Materials and Markham's Nursery are my two favorite places to get compost from. They both have really high quality stuff. Minnick has like 3 different types of compost too. And the more types you can get, the more that you can mix it together, the better. So I try and get, all the Minnick varieties and then the Markham's compost. And I mix all that together. And then I use some of our compost. We've got a worm bin that I'll show here in a minute too. But that's where we get, that's our only source of fertilizer, aside from fish fertilizer that we use as a nitrogen source every now and then. But we don't buy any chemical fertilizers. We haven't had to use it. It's all just worked for us just doing this way. So the idea is we're trying to replicate what happens in the forest here. So no one's going out in the forest and fertilizing or doing anything. It's taking care of itself. And the way it's doing that is the leaves and the twigs and all that stuff are all falling down on the ground. And it looks kind of like this, right? And then it breaks down, and then it's soil life that feeds itself. So, I mean, if you look, I looked somewhere the other day, and there were just worms everywhere as soon as if I was looking here, probably. Nope, strike one. I was looking the other day, and I literally just pulled a handful of worms everywhere. I mean, that's the point, is you want to have as much life in your soil as you can. It's cold, that's why the worms are there. It was warm on Thursday. That's
It
why.
was,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So, and that's the whole point, is because the worms are taking that dead stuff and they're eating it and turning it into good stuff for your plants. So if you put chemical fertilizers down in your garden, it'll work, but now it's going to change for one, it's going to add a lot of salt in your soil. It's going to make it to where the worms and stuff aren't going to want to be there, and they're going to go somewhere else. You're not going to have the other soil life going. So now, again, the plants are dependent on you taking care of them and you providing nutrients over and over, which is not a sustainable practice. So that's why I don't use chemical fertilizers. It's not necessarily because I'm super hippie. It's more so just because I think it's not a sustainable process and it's not a very efficient way to grow. So it does take some patience. You're going to have more issues with pests. Although I will say chemical fertilizers will cause pest issues because when plants get too much nitrogen, it'll signal to the pests that they're super healthy and that, the pests know that too. So as far as how to mix this stuff together, I want to talk briefly about how we do that because it was a pain in the beginning because we were mixing it on a tarp and doing all that. And I want to show you actually how we mix right over here. Whenever we make our soil mix, we will go through and take basically a bucket of each thing. So this is the vermiculite. I've got peat moss render somewhere. We'll get a bucket of that and then a bucket of compost. And then I put each one in here. And then, so this is the compost tumbler. It's terrible for compost, but it's great for this. So, and then basically I'll just go through and just keep spinning that around and it'll mix it together for me in there. And then I can dump that back out into a wheelbarrow, or I'll just do this directly on top of the raised bed. Just dump directly in. The easiest way I found to mix soil, I had a larger one of these before, but it broke. Yeah, it will this will tear them up, after a season or two. But the thing is they're such bad compost products that they're always on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist because they don't work for compost. It just creates gross stuff when you put it in there because in my opinion, you need the ground to make compost. But anyway, that's what we use these for. They're awesome for that. T-posts, we've got them laying around everywhere because I'm always looking on the side of the road when I'm driving, and they're always there, especially on around big trash day because people get trees, put in, they pull them up a couple years later. So we use them. All of our trellises are T-posts and either cattle panel or these hardware mesh panels that we get from Home Depot for $8. These are over in the concrete section. They're what you lay down when you're pouring concrete. It's the cheapest way to do a trellis. They do have some pointy ends on the sides, so that is a concern with the kids. I try and not use those as often anymore. Okay, so once we built out all of this, it was great, but we didn't have a lot of food in June and July because it got too hot. So that's when we started building out this way, because I realized shade was my friend, and I was afraid of shade when we first started gardening. And I didn't realize it can be a valuable asset, especially in Oklahoma. So that's when we built this bed here. And this allowed us to have spinach and kale all the way into June for the first time. So that was really nice. And I've taken temperature measurements here, and it's literally 30 degrees cooler here than it is over there in the middle of summer at the exact same time. So, so that's where the idea for this bed came from. We've got some rainwater collection set up too. I've got videos on our YouTube that show how we make this kind of stuff. I'm not going to go into too much detail on it, but the idea behind why we do rainwater collection, when I mix fish fertilizer, to feed plants, it doesn't work as well if the water is a different temperature than the plants. And also if it's like colder, then it'll shock the plants and it'll slow down the absorption of the nutrients. So, and I learned that from the Square Foot Gardening book, is what talks a lot about, using sun-warmed water. And I did tests, and I saw, I saw firsthand that was true. But I was having a lot of buckets sitting around the garden with just like waiting for the sun to warm them up. And it was annoying. So that was where the idea started of I should do rainwater collection. Also rainwater can sometimes be fertilized in a way. So if there was lightning in the air at the time the rain was coming down, it can be energized with nitrogen basically. And so that was where the idea started from. We have this one here, then we have the larger one over there. That one over there, I think is 600 gallons. And we have it hooked up to the house so that you see that kind of the 3 pipes over on the left. That's a siphoning system. So when water first comes in, it goes through there, and then because the dirtiest water accumulates when it first starts raining, and then once that fills up, then it goes over and diverts over. So I've got videos that detail all of that. It's cool. We don't use it a whole lot. I mean, I use it when I'm fertilizing. I've got it where I can run a hose and water a garden off of if I need to, but with how large of our garden, I mean, I can only water for a week off of that whole thing being full. So it's just, and I'd have to get an RV water pump and hook it up to it, a solar panel, and trust me, one day I'm gonna have a computer that does it all. But just haven't had time for that project. So when we first started composting, we took zip ties and pallets, and I zip tied the pallets together, and we made one that looked kind of like that right here. And I started bringing in as many bulk sources of nutrients as I could. So horse manure, coffee grounds, wood chips, leaves, all sorts of stuff like that. And we were making our own compost, and I was making a lot. And then our first year, all of our tomatoes died out of nowhere. And we weren't sure what happened. And after going all the way to the head of soil science for OSU, I figured out that it was because I was using compost that was tainted with herbicide. So what had happened was the horses from the horse manure that I was bringing in were eating on fields that were sprayed with herbicide, and it goes right through their body. So as soon as that happened, this turned from a compost bin into this bed, and this bed became only stuff that I could grow for the compost. So I told myself, I'm not going to bring in horse manure anymore. I'm going to grow my own horse manure, was the idea. So in the back, like it's mostly dormant right now. You can't even really see, but here's an egg sac for an orb weaver. Anyone want to take an orb weaver home? No? So this is comfrey down here, and you can see the sprouts coming up. See those little green sprouts? So comfrey is a unique plant because its roots go like 30 feet down in the ground eventually, and it pulls nutrients up that most other plants can't get to. So it takes those nutrients and it stores them, well, in this. And then I can take this and put it in my compost, and then that breaks down, and then I've got a really well-rounded compost that I made without having to use animal products at all. So we did have a giant rabbit, a Flemish giant. We had a dog altercation with the rabbit I don't want to get into, but we're going to get one again and get better security for the rabbit in the spring. So that's another way, we have, he'll live in there, and we'll feed him a lot of this stuff too, and then all of that manure goes over into there as well. So the idea was I wasn't going to bring in any more animal products that's I could vouch for where they ate from, because that was a traumatizing experience when all of our tomatoes just died on us. And I almost quit gardening. So we have other stuff we'll grow in here. Like, so this bed is mostly, so it's comfrey, and it's a lot of stuff that the rabbit will eat too. And then that'll turn into compost. So like peas, things like that. It feels like it's getting colder, doesn't it? Man, okay.
If you haven't ever seen comfrey, it is beautiful too. Yes,
And the
it
bees
attracts
love
a
it.
lot of benefits
Yes,
too.
the huge bees, the big old like
Constantly, yes,
bumblebees, like the ones you want to pet.
Several.
I'm gonna pet one. She won't. Every time I try to, she freaks out on me.
No!
So this is our compost bin here. Again, we just take, you know, all that different stuff that I mentioned earlier, except for the horse manure now. But here's coffee grounds here, you see. And we just mix that around together, and eventually, you know, it comes out as, I don't have any compost. It's like super fresh right now, but it depends on a lot of different factors. So one is the temperature. So right now, you're not going to get very much. It's not going to happen very quick. The hotter it gets, the faster it happens. Also, you got to make sure that you keep it moist. If you don't have enough moisture in there, the process won't happen. And you got to have like the right mixture of, it sounds complicated, but it's not. But you just got to mix like leaves with wood chips and stuff. You can't just have straight wood chips. So the first year I had a thermometer that was like really long. I could stick down the pile, and I used that a lot. And then you just kind of learn, and you go from there. But you know, in Oklahoma, you could probably turn a pile in 3 months from if you turned it often and you kept it watered. In the first year, I was doing a lot of that, but I just don't do it as much anymore. It's not as fun as it used to be. These beds over here, again, these are the ones that don't do as well in the winter, but you see all this stuff survived over the winter here. This is different types of kale, and y'all are welcome to take and try whatever you like. We've got some, I think this is all kale. Swiss chard mostly died. This is dinosaur kale. That's white Russian, I think. That's a red Russian over there.
Talk about the hoop houses.
Yeah, let's talk about these. So you see these things that aren't really doing much right now, but what we'll start doing in the spring is you see, like this is where we had insect netting. It was, so we'll take these and unscrew them and just put new insect netting back over it and screw it back down, and that's what holds it down. And we mostly just do insect netting with this. We've also done like the plastic sheeting as like a greenhouse type thing, but these kale did fine without it. This is really for protection from insects. So we'll start adding that on once they're coming back out again. This bed over here is all mint, just a bunch of different types of mint. It's going to be mint chaos because mint like takes over. And we planted like 7 ones together to see who'd win. Why not? So it's just a ton of mint through here. We don't really eat mint that much, but I use it a lot in drinks. So in the summer, I'll put it in like a water mixture and do all that. Any questions about any of this stuff before we're going to go inside here in a minute and show you stuff from there. It's warmer. Over here, we have a worm bin set up. This is the stuff that comes out when the worms are done with it. And this is our main source of fertilizer. We put a scoop of this in the bottom of every planting, and we sprinkle it over everything that we do with seeds. And there's a worm in there now. So this is where we put our food scraps, because food scraps in the compost causes some problems. One, that's what was bringing our mice issues in the beginning. 2, it just takes a little bit longer for some of that stuff to break down. So worms are a lot more efficient at taking that stuff and breaking it down. So that's why we use worms for the most part. So most of our food scraps from the kitchen go into here. These worms made it all throughout the winter, just being insulated from this, from the hay on the side, from having this in there, having that on top. And then we have a worm factory that I'll show you once we get over on the other side of the house. So we use indoors during the growing season. Okay, let's come on over here. So if we were starting over again, I would probably mostly do this because it's the most convenient way to grow. The reason why I say that is because in the summer, it's so easy to keep these watered because I just take a kiddie pool. Hey, Marty. I take a kiddie pool and then I'll fill it up with water, and I'll just take this and just set it inside the kiddie pool until it's fully saturated and just go through and rotate and do that. And that's how I water them. Or if it's something that really drinks a lot, I'll just kind of leave it in the kiddie pool for a bit. So yeah, I'm a big fan of these smaller smart pots and growing this way. All right, you want to come inside and I'll show you some of our seed starting stuff and we can be warmer.
She gets excited.
All right, so I wanted to finish it off by talking about how we start seeds and show you what we're doing, because this is literally where we do it. So we've got one of our seed starting areas here. We've got broccoli and cabbage and kale through here. And then these are peppers and tomatoes we just started yesterday. It's really simple to start seeds, and you'll save a lot of money. So that was what led us to start, because the first year I bought all my plants the first year because I wanted to eliminate variables. I wanted to have success, and I thought if I started seeds that maybe, like that would be something that could go wrong. Looking back on it, it was not something I would have been fine just starting my seeds from the beginning, because it's a really easy thing to do, and you're gonna end up with healthier plants too, because they're not being transported all around and all sorts of other issues. You're gonna have more variety in what you can pick out, which is, I think, the funnest thing for me. Is I love to, the same energy that I put into like collecting football cards when I was a kid goes into collecting plants now and trying all different types. So when you just buy plants from a big box store, you're going to get the same 5 types of tomatoes everywhere in the country, right? You're not going to be able to really hone in on one of the ones that do really well here in Oklahoma. And so that's why I like buying seeds and starting indoors. I really recommend these self-watering ones, because this lasts 10 days without us having to do anything. So there's like a reservoir down here and a little mat where it pulls water up. So it's been nice.
It's amazing. I can just forget about it.
Because I do forget about it. So this is from Burpee. Yeah, we have links in our app where you can buy these through Burpee. But they also they sell Burpee products at Walmart, so you can buy the stuff at Walmart or Tractor Supply. Around here, Atwoods is typically pretty good prices on this kind of stuff. I had neither. And one thing I'll say too, I tend to be someone that does something that's very cheap. So I have always bought like the cheapest seed starting stuff, or I've made my own mix. Burpee sent me this one, and I actually got to try like theirs for the first time, and one thing I really like about theirs is the pellets they sent that go with it. And you can buy these pellets like standalone to go with any system, because one, they're made from coconut coir, so you don't, if you're concerned about that, instead of peat moss, which I mentioned out there, the peat moss, you could substitute coconut coir instead. But every other seed starting pellet that I've tried has been a pain in the butt. Like the ones with the mesh around them, they just don't expand very well. They dry up quick. These have been awesome. I mean, if you want to come in here and look at them, they expanded in a hurry. The consistency of them was nice. It just felt like a better quality than the other stuff I'd use. So I probably wouldn't have spent the money on something like this. And then when they sent it to me, it was like, oh, well, this is actually really nice. I've been skimping this whole time. Maybe I shouldn't have, because we've been fighting underwatering and things like that. So I want to talk a little bit about this too. So this is thyme, and we started it last year from one of our thyme plants out in the garden. So I want to talk just briefly about how you can do that, because you can save a lot of money doing it that way. So I could start one actually here just from these. So this was all started just off of literally one little thing like this. So you're not supposed to snap it off like that. That was bad of me. But the idea is you get something like this, and then strip off the bottom leaves. And then they have this rooting hormone powder that you can get on Amazon. You just dip this like $1. It's super cheap. You dip this down into, and then you stick that in the soil. And that's literally all we did on these. And they just sat all winter in the office. And now we've got, they're looking good. Now we can make new plants off of these again. So that's how quickly and easily you can take one plant and get a lot more off of it with thyme, oregano. This works on pretty much all the herbs like that. And we've got guides in the app that tell you what you can do this with and what you can't. So we've got, there's other ways you can do grow lights and stuff. We've got one in our office. It's like a 5-shelf system. I've got a video on our YouTube that shows you how you make that.
I had a question about that. Do you
Yeah.
find that there's a big difference between using grow lights and just putting it in the right window?
We don't have a window is the problem, because it has to be a window that gets direct sun, like a south-facing window. And we have one in our bedroom, but it's really not room there. And even then, it's not enough for peppers and tomatoes. They need really intense light. So I think for some things, like for this time or whatever, yeah, I could have put that in a window. It would have been fine. But it just really depends on what it is. Any other questions or anything?
I had a question too about like reseeding.
Mm-hmm.
How often, because I'm always reading about it, but it's like, well, if you're supposed to be seeding it at a particular time of year,
Yeah.
is it still going to grow worth the darn if you're throwing seeds in, 2 months after that or whatever?
Well, so it depends on what it is. So, like, what's a specific example of something that,
Well,
like beans or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lettuce even.
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
Something that you cut and then
Yeah.
it's kind of gone.
Yeah.
And then
Well, lettuce is actually, well, if when you cut it, it'll come back.
True.
So the way that we do plantings on, it's different for everything. So like for tomatoes and peppers, like that's like a one-time planting experience. I'm not continuing planting those, right? But for beans, for carrots, for lettuce, for spinach, for all of those, it is like a continual, like every 2 weeks I'm planting during that window.
Okay.
So our app has a window where it'll like, so during that window, and I'll be honest with you, I'm cheating. I'm starting like 2 weeks earlier on that because the app is geared towards
Safe.
yeah, So
Okay.
the freeze date that we have like set in there is like April 15th. Well, I key off of like April 1st as the freeze date. I'm willing to risk it, and then just know that, but I won't put all my tomatoes out early. I'll
Right.
put some of my tomatoes out early and keep half of them in here so that I don't lose them all if something goes wrong.
And
But-
even so, we use a lot of smart pots too.
Mhm.
We can bring
Move them
in
inside, yeah.
if there's an issue.
Yeah. The problem is in Oklahoma, the game you're playing with peppers and tomatoes is that if you wait too long to get them out, you're not going to get anything until after summer because they don't produce fruit when the temperatures are above 90. So the flowers just drop off. Now you can get around it by moving them and doing things, but it's a difficult game once temperatures get that high. So then you're waiting until it's August before your tomatoes start producing a bunch. And a lot of people think that they just failed and that they give up before then. So that's why if you can get a start on tomatoes early, then it can be a benefit. Especially what we'll do is we've got like some of these varieties. Some of these I've got a tomato in here that's like 65 days from transplant. Like super fast tomatoes. They only get like 2 feet tall and then produce a ton. So I've got those that I'm trying to get going now that we're going to get outdoors as fast as possible. And then the other ones like the indeterminates and stuff, those I'll roll out later in the season. And then I just know I'm not going to get anything off those until the end of the year. That's where we get a bunch at the end of the year off those. And for beans and everything like that, like I said, we're just, beans fall into the category. So they're in the legume family. I pretty much have those beans, peas, and southern peas. I have one of those going every 2 weeks. I'm planting one of those things. So it's peas starting from now. Well, it's a little early now. Like 2 weeks from now, I'll start them. From then until April 8th. And then I'll switch to beans. And I'll do pole beans and bush beans. And I'll do that until the end of April, beginning of May. And then I'll do southern peas. And I'll plant them until June, July. And then I'll go back to beans again. And that's in August. And then I go back to peas. And then peas sometimes will overwinter. But I have one of those going for like always. For one, because legumes take nitrogen out of the air and put it into the ground and feed your other plants. So they have that benefit. But two, they're just one of the easiest things to grow and something we eat a ton of. I mean, we have stir fry like every single day during the season, just a matter of what's in it. So it's just, we always like to have peas or beans or something like that in the stir fry.
I also wondered, sorry, jeopardizing.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Do you ever do dry beans? Do you ever?
Yeah.
Okay.
It blew my mind, yeah.
How much it would produce if it's worthwhile trying?
Oh, it is, yeah. It blew my mind the first time that I learned that dried beans are just old green beans. Like, the first time I learned that, it's just like, I don't know why I didn't realize that, but that's so, like southern peas, for example. We'll eat them fresh as green beans, but then we'll let a lot of them go and dry on the pod, and then we'll have black-eyed peas from that. And you'd think that, like, are you going to get enough off of it? Yeah, you really do. I mean, like, it's worth it. I mean, I don't have like an exact number off of how many, but it feels like off of.
We made a pretty big mason jar full of dried beans.
Really?
It's basically the amount of fresh green beans that you would eat produce a good amount of dried beans that you would eat, like an equivalent portion of meal. So I thought kind of early on like it wouldn't be worth growing for dried beans, but And then the cool thing too is like pretty much any bean that we forget to pick that goes to seed, well, that just becomes a bean. So it's either one we're eating or one we're saving for the next year just to plant.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Are your surplus, do you like can or freeze or?
So we do a lot of freezing. I haven't gotten canning down yet, but we do freeze a whole bunch. I mean, you should see how many peppers we have in our freezer right now. But yeah, we do that for.
It depends on what it is too, because some
I've done
things.
green beans is freezing too. But
Yeah. Because some things like to be preserved differently than others.
yeah, some things we dry.
Like some of the herbs, like we'll have a bunch of like dried oregano and sage and all that, but basil doesn't preserve very well like that. So with basil, we'll make little oil cubes, frozen oil cubes of basil, and like ice cube trays basically. So we do. So it just depends on what it is. And again, she's got that in every vegetable in the app. She's got her description of what she does to preserve it or save it or cook, like all that kind of stuff. Everything in the app that's about a plant she has typed. That's all comes from her. Thank you. SmartPods donated a bunch of SmartPods to give out to y'all. So take whatever size you find.